Harrison Ford storms away with joy. Behar's scornful comments about his role. Well, 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 look who we have here. Joy Behar's voice rang out across the set of The View, her words dripping with sarcastic amusement as she gazed across the table at the legendary Harrison Ford. Her signature smirk stretched across her face, and the audience, sensing the underlying tension, fell into a hushed silence. Behar had already set the stage for what was about to unfold. Harrison Ford, the man who had portrayed iconic characters like Han Solo and Indiana Jones, was sitting across from her, an expression of quiet patience on his face. He had done this routine hundreds of times before promoting his latest film, engaging in light banter with the hosts, but today it felt different. There was a coldness in the air, and it wasn't just the studio lights. Ford adjusted himself in his chair, his calm demeanor the only thing keeping the storm from breaking loose. His publicist, standing off camera, felt her stomach churn. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had carefully briefed the producers, emphasizing that the conversation should remain lighthearted and professional. But Behar had other plans. Harrison Ford, Behar continued, her eyes gleaming with mischief. The man who made a career out of playing the same grumpy character over and over again, from Han Solo to Indiana Jones, and let's not forget, Blade Runner. The grumpy pilot, the grumpy archaeologist, the grumpy detective. Do you ever switch it up, Harrison? The audience's murmurs filled the space, their eyes darting back and forth between Ford and Behar. This wasn't the warm greeting Ford had been expecting. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Whoopi Goldberg, who had been preparing for a light-hearted exchange, now sat rigid, unsure of how to steer the conversation away from this awkward beginning. Ford's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't flinch. His voice remained steady as he responded, his calm a stark contrast to Behar's pointed jab. "I'm sorry, Joy," he said, his tone measured. "I think you might be confusing me with someone else. I've played a lot of different characters throughout my career. I don't know if grumpy is the word I'd use for them." Behar leaned forward, clearly enjoying the tension she had just ignited. "Oh, really?" she asked, her voice laced with a mocking sweetness. "Let's see. You've got the grumpy pilot in Star Wars, the grumpy archaeologist in Indiana Jones, and the grumpy detective in Blade Runner. Seems like a pattern to me, don't you think?" Ford's posture stiffened, but he held his ground. His publicist's anxiety was palpable, but Ford wasn't one to back down from a challenge, even if it came from a talk show host. He glanced around at the other hosts, hoping they might step in and change the direction of the conversation, but they were frozen in place, unsure of how to respond. "Joy?" Ford said, his voice slightly firmer now. "I came here to talk about my new film. Maybe we could focus on that instead of whatever agenda you seem to have today." Behar's smirk deepened. She wasn't backing down. "Agenda? I don't have an agenda, Harrison," she snapped. "I'm just calling it like I see it. You've been coasting on the same handful of roles for decades. When was the last time you actually challenged yourself as an actor?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded with implication. Ford's jaw clenched, but his gaze remained steady. This was more than a casual interview. It was personal. It was an attack, and it was clear that Behar was determined to make it one. Ford had faced difficult interviewers before, but this felt different. This felt like an ambush. "You know, Joy," Ford began, his calm starting to crack just slightly. "I've been acting for over 50 years. I've worked with some of the greatest directors in the history of cinema. I've played everything from carpenters to presidents, and I've never once felt the need to justify my career choices to someone who makes a living gossiping on daytime television." The studio fell silent, save for the hum of the cameras. Behar's face flushed, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she doubled down. "Gossiping," she repeated, her voice rising. "Is that what you think this is? I'm asking legitimate questions about your career, questions that your fans deserve answers to. Or are you too much of a prima donna to handle a little honest criticism?" Ford stood up slowly, the scrape of his chair against the floor cutting through the tension in the air. His hand curled into a fist at his side, and for a moment it seemed like he might lose his composure. But he didn't. He looked down at Behar, his voice lowering to a dangerous quiet. "Honest criticism," he repeated, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't criticism, Joy. This is an ambush. I've faced down real critics in my career, critics who actually knew what they were talking about. You're not even in their league." The other hosts finally seemed to snap out of their stupor, each of them casting nervous glances at Behar, unsure how to diffuse the situation. Whoopi Goldberg attempted to intervene with a joke, but her words died in her throat as both Ford and Behar turned to glare at her simultaneously. Behar wasn't backing down. Her voice now carried a venomous edge. "Sit down, Harrison," she demanded, her tone rising with each word. "You don't get to intimidate me just because you're some big movie star. This is my show, and I'll ask whatever questions I want to ask. Your show." Ford's laugh was cold, devoid of humor. He glanced at the panel of hosts, his eyes lingering for a moment before returning to Behar. "Your show is a joke, Joy," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You spend your days tearing down people who actually create things while you contribute nothing but negativity to the world. At least when I play a grumpy character, I'm getting paid to pretend." The studio fell into a tense silence, the gravity of Ford's words hanging in the air. Behar, her face now flushed a deep shade of red, was clearly rattled. But she wasn't done. She wasn't about to let Ford have the last word. "You think you're better than everyone else, don't you?" She shot back, her voice tinged with a sharp bitterness. "You think that because you were in a few successful movies that gives you the right to look down on the rest of us? Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Ford. Your best days are behind you and everyone knows it." For a moment it seemed like Ford might actually lose his composure completely. His fists clenched, his breath coming faster. His eyes flicked to the audience, who, like the other hosts, seemed to sense that they were witnessing something much bigger than an awkward interview. This was a battle of egos of public figures desperate to claim the moral high ground. Ford's gaze didn't leave Behar. His voice was cold and measured, the hurt from her words barely contained beneath the surface. "My best days are behind me." He repeated the words so quiet that they barely registered above a whisper. But there was a weight to them that made everyone in the room hold their breath. "Let's talk about your best days, Joy. When exactly were those? Was it when you were bombing on stage doing stand-up comedy that nobody found funny? Or maybe it was when you were desperately clinging to whatever relevance you could find by attacking people who actually accomplished something with their lives?" Behar's mouth fell open, and for the first time she seemed caught off guard. The silence in the room was deafening. No one had expected this. No one had expected Ford to strike back with such precision, with such venom. Joy Behar, the queen of daytime television, was rattled. The tension in the studio was palpable. Ford's words hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Joy Behar, usually the one in control of every conversation, stood frozen for a moment. Her signature composure faltered, but it didn't last long. With a flash of defiance in her eyes, she regained her footing, her voice trembling slightly with indignation. "How dare you?" She spat, her usual confidence now cracked. "You don't know anything about my career or my life. You think you can just walk in here and insult me like that?" The room seemed to contract around her words. Ford, however, remained calm, not even flinching. His eyes locked with hers, his posture still unwavering. He had no intention of backing down. He'd been in this business long enough to know when to fight and when to ignore, but Behar had pushed him too far. Ford's voice, still calm but laced with a hint of sharpness, responded with calculated precision. "I know enough, Joy," he said slowly, as if each word carried the weight of a lifetime in Hollywood. "I know that you built whatever career you have by tearing other people down. I know that you hide behind this panel of women, thinking it gives you some kind of shield to say whatever cruel thing pops into your head. And I know deep down you're probably miserable because happy people don't spend their time trying to make others feel small." Behar's face turned redder than before. Her hand clenched into a fist, but she didn't move. The other hosts, who had been frozen throughout most of the exchange, seemed to start stirring. Whoopi Goldberg shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while the others shot anxious glances at each other, unsure whether to intervene or let this wild confrontation play out. But Ford wasn't done. "You want to know what I think?" Ford continued, his voice growing quieter but more forceful, as if he were speaking not just to Behar but to everyone in the room. "Your show is a joke. It's not even about entertainment anymore. It's about tearing down people who actually matter." The camera zoomed in, capturing every second of the exchange. Ford's words were cutting a direct challenge to Behar's entire existence in the television industry. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The audience was waiting for someone to break the deadlock. but it was clear Ford was not about to be the one to apologize. "You think you're so much better than the rest of us, don't you?" Behar's voice was now louder, filled with a mix of anger and hurt. "You think that because you starred in a few successful movies that gives you the right to look down on everyone else. Well, let me tell you something. Harrison Ford, your best days are behind you, and you know it." The words cut deeper than Behar could have anticipated. Ford's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. His calm was becoming more unsettling. Slowly, he stood up. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor echoed throughout the silent studio. Behar's eyes widened, but she didn't back down. "Sit down, Harrison," she snapped, her voice rising again, but this time there was a tremor in her words. "You don't get to intimidate me just because you're a big movie star. This is my show. I'll ask whatever questions I want, and if you can't handle it, maybe you should leave." Ford stood there for a moment staring at her. His eyes were cold, like a man who had just been pushed to the edge but wasn't quite ready to snap. He had been in this industry for decades. He had faced down critics, the media, and fans alike. But this was different. "You think this is your show, Joy?" he asked quietly. His voice was almost too calm. "This isn't your show. This is a platform for you to make people feel small and insignificant. You spend your days gossiping about people who actually create things. You contribute nothing but negativity to the world. At least when I play a grumpy character, I'm getting paid to pretend. You're getting paid to tear people down." Behar's face twisted with indignation. Her body stiffened and her breath came faster. She wasn't prepared for this kind of counterattack. She wasn't prepared for Ford to strike back so precisely, so surgically. He wasn't just defending his career anymore. He was calling out the very foundation of her show, the very thing that had made her famous. The other hosts, now visibly uncomfortable, tried to interject. Whoopi Goldberg attempted a nervous joke, but it was clear that the situation was far beyond humor. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. It was no longer just an awkward interview. This was a public confrontation that would be talked about for years to come. "You think you're better than me," Behar demanded, her voice shaking now. "You think you can just walk into my studio and talk to me like that? You think you have the right to judge me?" Ford's expression remained unchanged. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took a step closer to the panel. "I don't have to judge you, Joy," he said, his voice still cold. "The truth speaks for itself." The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Ford's calm had not been shattered by Behar's words. Instead, he had let them wash over him, only to return with something far more dangerous, the power of silence, of control. He wasn't fighting with her anymore. He was simply exposing her. "You know what's truly sad?" Ford continued, his voice softer now, but filled with an underlying venom. "You probably think you've won here today. You probably think that attacking me on national television will somehow make you look strong. But all you've done is expose exactly who you are to the world. And trust me, it's not pretty." Behar's mouth fell open. She had no words left. The room was frozen. No one spoke. The camera continued to roll, capturing the uncomfortable silence that followed Ford's words. It was as if time itself had slowed down. The silence stretched on, unbearable. Behar opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Her words had failed her. The audience could feel it. The entire world could feel it. Ford hadn't just won the argument. He had dismantled everything Behar had spent years building. And then finally, Ford turned and walked off the set. The sound of his footsteps echoed as he left the studio, leaving behind a stunned Behar who remained seated at the table, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. The other hosts could only stare, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Ford didn't look back. He had made his point. The studio was still, the silence deafening. Harrison Ford's footsteps faded into the distance as he exited the set, leaving behind a stunned room. The hosts of The View remained motionless, as though paralyzed by the sheer intensity of the moment they had just witnessed. Behar, still sitting in her chair, was trembling, her face flushed, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her usual sharp wit was gone. The once dominant figure of daytime television now seemed small, caught off guard by Ford's relentless precision. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the aftermath. The producer, who had been overseeing the broadcast, anxiously tapped his ear, signaling to the control room. He could feel the heat from the mounting tension, and the panic was palpable. Should they cut to a commercial break? Should they intervene? But it was clear now that they had no control over the situation. The wheels of the train had already left the station, and there was no stopping the inevitable fallout. "Cut to commercial," one of the producers finally barked, his voice shaking. But even as the directive was given, the damage had already been done. Whoopi Goldberg, who had remained silent throughout most of the confrontation, finally spoke. Her voice was soft, hesitant, but it carried the weight of the moment. I think we need to acknowledge what just happened," she said, her eyes shifting between the remaining hosts. There was no more laughter in the air, no more pretense of light-hearted banter. This wasn't a funny moment to discuss. It was raw, real, and unsettling. Joy Behar, still gripping the table, finally managed to speak, her voice trembling but laced with bitterness. "He thinks he can walk out on me after all I've done for him. That was unprofessional." Her words came out in a rush, almost as if she were trying to convince herself. "I just asked him some questions. I didn't do anything wrong." But deep down, Behar knew that wasn't true. The audience could feel it too. Her attack on Ford had crossed a line. It wasn't just about his career anymore. It was personal, and Ford had made it clear that he wasn't going to sit back and take it. The other hosts remained silent, unsure of how to proceed. They were caught in the crossfire of an explosive interaction, one that they had not been prepared for. They had all seen Ford's famous intensity on screen, but to witness it in person, to feel the weight of his words, was something entirely different. His calmness had been his weapon, and Behar had unwittingly walked right into it. The cameras cut to a commercial break, but the damage was done. The internet exploded in real time. Social media platforms lit up with reactions from viewers, many of whom had been watching the live broadcast. Ford's fans and even casual viewers were quick to voice their support for the actor. Teamford is trending one tweet read while another added, "Joy got owned by Harrison Ford." The memes started pouring in, with Ford's unshaken composure being turned into GIFs and viral video clips. It was the kind of moment that would live on far beyond the confines of daytime television. But it wasn't just Ford's supporters who were speaking out. There were those who believed Behar had crossed a line, who felt she had intentionally provoked Ford to humiliate him on national television. A few of the tweets took a darker tone, questioning the ethics of daytime television in general, and whether shows like The View were more about public shaming than entertainment. "This isn't TV. This is public execution disguised as entertainment," one commentator wrote. "Joy Behar should be ashamed of herself." On the flip side, there were those who felt that Behar had been unfairly attacked. They believed that Ford, despite his decades of acting experience, should have been able to handle some playful criticism. Some Twitter users defended Behar, arguing that her questions had been fair and that Ford had overreacted. He's just an actor. Not everyone's going to love him one tweet read. Joy was just doing her job. Maybe Harrison should have stayed calm and not made it personal. But regardless of which side viewers fell on, one thing was undeniable: the clash between Ford and Behar had become a defining moment in television history. The kind of moment that would be talked about for years to come. People weren't just talking about Ford's career or Behar's show anymore. They were talking about the power dynamics of public figures, the ethics of celebrity interviews, and the volatile nature of media in the modern world. Back in the studio, the show returned from the break, but the atmosphere was different. No longer light and breezy, the energy in the room was thick with uncertainty. The hosts knew they had to address the elephant in the room, but no one seemed sure how to approach the situation. Whoopi Goldberg, still the veteran of the group, took a deep breath and tried to steer the conversation back on course. "Well, that was something," she said, her voice attempting to lighten the mood, but it was clear she was just as rattled as everyone else. "We've seen some intense moments on this show before, but nothing like that." Behar, visibly shaken but unwilling to admit defeat, forced a smile. "Yeah, that was definitely unexpected," she said, though her words lacked the usual biting sarcasm. "But you know what, sometimes the truth hurts." The other hosts exchanged nervous glances. No one was buying it. They could all sense that Behar was trying to save face, but the damage was already done. There was no easy way to recover from this. Not in front of millions of viewers, not after such an explosive encounter. The conversation moved on, but the lingering tension was impossible to ignore. Behar struggled to regain her footing, but the cracks in her composure were too evident. Ford had walked away, but the aftershocks of his words had only just begun. As the show wrapped up, the team began preparing for the next segment, but everyone knew the rest of the day's broadcast would be overshadowed by the encounter with Harrison Ford. No one could predict what the fallout would be, but one thing was certain: this wasn't going to be something anyone on that stage would forget anytime soon. The aftermath of Harrison Ford's departure from The View rippled across social media, television broadcasts, and news outlets. What had started as a routine promotional interview had transformed into one of the most talked about moments in the history of daytime television. Ford's exit from the stage was the spark. The ensuing chaos was the fire. The confrontation had ignited a public reckoning. Joy Behar's usual bravado had faltered in front of millions of viewers. And as the clips of the encounter went viral, the shockwaves reverberated through the media landscape. No one could ignore the power dynamics that had been on full display. Ford, an icon of Hollywood, had shown an unwavering composure in the face of Behar's insults. But more than that, he had skillfully turned the tables, exposing the underlying toxicity of the View dynamic and Behar's approach to interviews. On Twitter, hashtags like Senior Ford Wins and Team Ford dominated the trending topics. Viewers who had been longtime fans of Behar's sharp wit and often confrontational style were suddenly re-evaluating their loyalty. The line between playful banter and personal attack had been blurred, and many were left questioning whether Behar had crossed it. What kind of a show is The View if they allow their host to attack people like this? One tweet read. Ford didn't just stand up for himself, he stood up for every actor who's been mocked on a talk show by a panel of supposed experts. Even the celebrity world took notice. Some stars publicly voiced their support for Ford. Harrison Ford showed grace under pressure. Actor Mark Hamill tweeted, "That's the kind of professionalism we should all strive for." But it wasn't just Ford's fans who made their voices heard. There were those who stood by Behar, criticizing Ford for his overreaction. Many in the media rallied behind Behar, arguing that she had simply asked tough questions, which was her job as a talk show host. Ford's career has been based on playing the same role for decades, a media critic commented. Behar's questions were fair. He just couldn't handle the heat. The clash between Ford and Behar wasn't just a personal battle. It was a moment that illuminated the broader dynamics between celebrities and talk show hosts, between the powerful and the people who make a living dissecting their every move. In the court of public opinion, both sides had their defenders. But the question remained, had Behar gone too far? As the days passed, the press continued to cover the fallout. Talk shows and news programs dissected every word spoken during the interview. Media pundits speculated about the real reason Ford had snapped. Some suggested that Ford had grown tired of being pigeonholed into grumpy roles, while others wondered whether Behar had genuinely provoked him. But the story was far from over. In the world of daytime television, controversies like this have a habit of spiraling out of control. Despite the viral backlash, Behar returned to the show after a short break. She was met with a mix of support and criticism from her co-hosts and the staff, but she maintained her usual air of confidence, albeit with a slight edge to her demeanor. It was clear that she had been rattled, but she refused to show weakness. "Well, folks, we've got a lot to unpack today," Behar said on her return, trying to regain control of the situation. "But we're moving forward. I'm not backing down from what I said. This is my show, and I'll ask whatever questions I want." Her words felt forced, as though she were trying to convince herself more than anyone else. The audience, while polite, could sense the unease beneath the surface. It was hard to ignore the weight of what had happened. The tension in the air was thick, and while Behar may have tried to act as though nothing had changed, everyone knew it had. Ford, on the other hand, remained silent. He had made his point. He didn't need to engage in further battles with Behar. His fans were firmly on his side, and the viral moment spoke volumes. The quiet dignity he had displayed during the interview became his weapon, and he wielded it with expert precision. For Behar, the encounter had been a wake-up call. It had forced her and her audience to confront a deeper issue, the delicate balance between tough questioning and personal attacks. She had spent years cultivating a persona of unapologetic sharpness, but now, in the aftermath of Ford's calculated verbal takedown, she found herself questioning whether that same persona had become her undoing. The rest of the week passed with little fanfare. The producers of The View scrambled to regain control of the narrative. The show's viewership saw a slight increase due to the viral nature of the incident, but it was clear that the show's image had been permanently altered. The drama surrounding Ford and Behar had become more than just an on-screen spat. It was a cultural moment that spoke to the wider questions of celebrity culture, public shaming, and the blurred lines between entertainment and personal attacks. As for Harrison Ford, he never commented publicly on the incident again. He had said what he needed to say, and he had done so with a calm that had left Behar and the world stunned. In the end, Ford's quiet retreat from the stage became his final word on the matter, a reminder that sometimes the greatest power lies not in shouting, but in standing firm in silence. Days turned into weeks, and the world continued to talk about the unforgettable clash between Harrison Ford and Joy Behar. The incident was no longer just a viral moment, it had become a turning point in the landscape of daytime television and celebrity culture. Every aspect of the confrontation was scrutinized, analyzed, and turned into a cultural touchstone that no one could ignore. For Behar, the fallout was more personal than professional, as the public began to question the ethics of her approach to interviewing. In the weeks following the interview, Behar remained publicly defiant, maintaining that she had done nothing wrong. But privately, the sting of Ford's words continued to linger. The sharpness of his attack had penetrated deeper than she had expected, and the once unshakable confidence she had exhibited on The View was now a carefully crafted facade. "I'm still here," she said in one of her interviews, trying to regain some control over the narrative. "I ask tough questions. That's my job. People love to see celebrities squirm a little. It's not personal. It's just how things work in this business." But the words rang hollow. Behar knew as well as anyone that this wasn't just about asking tough questions. This had been personal, and she had crossed a line. Her public comments about Ford became more defensive as the weeks went on. "I've been doing this for years," she told a gossip column. "I've had worse things said to me on air than anything Ford threw at me. But I'll admit I wasn't expecting that from him. He's usually so controlled." In a rare moment of self-awareness, Behar allowed a brief acknowledgement of the damage. "Maybe I pushed him too far." Meanwhile, Harrison Ford remained silent, but his actions spoke louder than words ever could. He had not issued any public statement regarding the incident, and the world speculated as to why. Was he simply above the drama? Did he feel no need to address something so beneath him? Or had he, in a way, already won by letting Behar's overreaction play out on television for everyone to witness? The truth was Ford had always been a private man. His personal life had remained largely untouched by the public eye, a rarity in Hollywood. It wasn't the first time he'd been in the public spotlight, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But what set this confrontation apart was the way in which Ford had maintained a quiet dignity, refusing to let Behar's attacks draw him into a messy public fight. By walking off, he hadn't just removed himself from the interview. He had taken control of the situation in the most subtle yet effective way possible by disengaging from the spectacle. His fans, especially those who had admired his work for decades, praised him for handling the confrontation with a cool, calculated approach. "That's Harrison Ford," one fan tweeted. "Always calm under pressure, always class." But Ford's absence from the media was more than just a strategic move, it was a statement. Ford had always been a man of action rather than words, and his silence after the incident spoke volumes. He didn't need to continue the argument. He had already made his point clear. When faced with personal attack, the best response was to simply walk away. For many, this was a moment of reflection. The entertainment world, with its ever-present demand for drama and conflict, often forgets the power of restraint. The confrontation between Ford and Behar was a stark reminder of the difference between confrontation and escalation. Ford had proven that sometimes the most powerful way to handle a conflict was not to engage in it at all. In the weeks that followed, The View experienced a noticeable shift in its tone. The once dominant voice of Behar was now tempered by the memory of her public defeat. The other hosts, while still supportive of Behar, couldn't ignore the shift in the audience's perception. They too began to question the ethics of celebrity interviews and whether the line between entertainment and personal disrespect had been crossed. "We need to do better," Whoopi Goldberg said on air one afternoon, her voice unusually somber. "It's not just about getting the scoop, it's about how we treat people, even the ones we're interviewing." It was a rare moment of introspection for a show that thrived on controversy, but for many, it was too little too late. Behar's reputation had been tarnished by the confrontation, and despite her attempts to move on, the shadow of the incident loomed large. Ford, on the other hand, had moved on with his life as if nothing had happened at all. The public had already spoken, and for him the matter was settled. But the impact of the event wasn't just confined to Behar and Ford. It sparked a wider conversation about the ethics of talk shows and celebrity interviews. In the age of social media and viral moments, the line between entertainment and personal attack had become increasingly blurred. Talk shows, once seen as a place for celebrities to promote their work and engage with the public, were now scrutinized for their tendency to incite conflict for the sake of ratings. "It's all about the drama now," one critic wrote in a post after the incident, and while that makes for good television, it doesn't always make for good journalism. The Ford-Behar confrontation was the perfect encapsulation of this new reality. It wasn't just an exchange between two people, it was a microcosm of a larger cultural shift in how we consume entertainment. People were no longer content with simple banter. They wanted blood, they wanted drama, and they wanted it now. And in a world where the lines between reality and performance were becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish, the Ford-Behar clash became a symbol of that unsettling truth.